You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 3rd of November 2024 on Monocle Radio.
It's the final push by both candidates ahead of a razor-tight election happening in just 2 days' time. We're live in Georgia as we take the temperature of the campaign so far.
The Monocle Daily, live from Atlanta, starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from the Beltline in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Monocle's senior foreign correspondent, Carlotta Rebello.
And I'm US editor Chris Lord. On the programme today, with a new poll out of Iowa suggesting that this Midwest state might be back in play for the Democrats, we talked to an Iowa state senator about why voters there are getting their swing back.
Also ahead, we turn our focus to Donald Trump as we look at the lawsuit he filed against Bucks County over mail-in ballots. And our own Chris Cermak reports from the rally in Lititz, Pennsylvania.
Plus, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is the world's busiest airport, but is also undergoing a major upgrade. We hear from the team behind the project on what it takes to revamp a global hub.
And we meet the architecture duo working hard to preserve Atlanta's historic landmarks.
Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily, live from Atlanta.
And welcome to a special edition of the Monocle Daily, coming to you live from the Beltline in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Carlotta Rebello here with Christopher Lord. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Carlotta.
It's our final day here in Atlanta, our last show before we head over to Washington, D.C. What have been your key takeaways from our week here in Georgia?
Well, look, last night we got out of this Beltline that we've been, parked up on for the last 4 days. We got out into the midtown area of Atlanta. And over there, you see a very different side of the city. You see big high-rise buildings, a lot of new, flashy stuff happening over there. But in amongst all that, you do find these amazing gems, institutions of the city. We had a great Southern-style meal last night, didn't we, with grits and shrimps and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, I can just hear our friend over there just firing up his guitar. So we've hosted him as he has hosted us this week.
Hey, I prefer to have him as our friend this afternoon than the leaf blowers, if I'm honest.
That's absolutely right. Now, Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes are critical, with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump aggressively campaigning in this key swing state. I'm joined on the line by Poppy Damon, who is in Bucks County in Pennsylvania. Poppy, great to have you with us. Just give us a bit of context here. Why is Pennsylvania so important to Harris and Trump?
Yes, good afternoon. So it's the fifth most populous state and offers those 19 electoral college votes that you mentioned. It's the biggest of the 7 swing states. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have campaigned here aggressively, visiting the state between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic more often than any other state this campaign. Pennsylvania is important for Harris, particularly because since 1948, no Democrat has become president without carrying Pennsylvania. But Trump's route to power also include Pennsylvania. So the stakes really couldn't be higher, Chris.
Now, you've been in Bucks County, consistently Democrat, but on very small margins. Why did you choose to visit?
So this week, Donald Trump's campaign successfully sued Bucks County for turning away voters due to long lines and polling stations closing. The Pennsylvania judge on Wednesday sided with Donald Trump's campaign and agreed to extend an in-person voting option. Bucks County is interesting for other reasons too, though. It's actually been consistently Democrat, but that's not true to the counties around it. We were driving down to the capital, a place called Doylestown, and we saw that there was an apple festival. So you might be able to picture it, bandstand with music, apple sauce, barbecue, axe throwing. It was lots of prosperous people in attendance. So we stopped off here to talk to voters. I started to speak to one Democrat voter who has been canvassing for Harris. I asked him what issues he was hearing on the doorstep here.
What I've heard mostly is, the economy. So that's been a major issue for pretty much everyone. But there are a few that I've been in contact with who have talked about immigration and crime as being an issue. Which I think really is a moot point. I don't think it's any more of an issue now than it has been over the last 40 years. So obviously it's become a good talking point for the other side that I'm not in support of. So, it's a matter of concern. Trying to dispel that myth is extremely difficult, is what I've found. So it's not about arguing when I'm knocking doors. It's more about just making sure the right people that we want to come out to vote.
And how hopeful are you feeling that it will be a victory for Harris here?
I'm pretty hopeful that it's going to be Harris, and I feel good about it. I'm not really going to feel good until we have the final results. But yes, I find it very hard to believe that we're even still having this discussion about Trump at this point. But I'm more disappointed in America than I am in Trump himself. He's just a figurehead of what the underlying issue is. So.
And just finally, we've gathered a sense that there's already been these battle lines drawn about disputes, I suppose, about voting. And so Bucks County being sued and then them saying, okay, well, we'll extend the lines, already feels like a certain pathway is being laid. Does that concern you?
Sure. I mean, they're constantly trying to undermine the results to set it up for if they, it doesn't come out in their favor, that they're automatically going to go down that road. We've already been there. So it's just kind of going to be a replay, but they've had more time to plan for it. So they're starting early before we even get to the election now to say, hey, it's going to be fake and, don't trust the results. And even if they go their way, I bet they're still probably going to say, hey, we won by more, or whatever the case may be. Just because it's a replay, we've already been down this road. So is there going to be any shock on my behalf if that happens? No, there will not be.
We then headed to the courthouse proper in Doylestown. There are a number of Trump supporters who were encouraging early postal votes to be turned in, who were using the rhetoric of the 2020 election being stolen. I asked one of them at the front to speak to me. His name was Joe Liverday, a roofer who was volunteering with Early Vote Action to make sure registered Republican voters turned in their votes in any way they can. I asked him why he joined that campaign.
There's so many people who just simply don't vote, and they stand for the things that I believe in. And so it's about targeting those low propensity individuals who typically wouldn't come out in an election and encouraging them through registration. Because once you've registered to vote, it's almost unlikely that you would feel like you wouldn't vote.
And who are you backing?
I am backing Donald J. Trump for president this year.
And why are you backing him?
There's a lot more moral issues happening in the world right now, particularly the right to life. The opposition right now, they've particularly fixated on abortion, and they've celebrated it to such a degree that it's been alarming. I thought that once Roe v. Wade was overturned, individuals would have more respect for human dignity. And the sole fact that at the convention, the Democrat convention, they were performing abortions like it was something special, that seemed to me pretty diabolical. There are states that do have more pro-life laws, and Kamala Harris would not be friendly to those states and those laws, and she has said that she wanted to eliminate all laws and codify Roe v. Wade.
And what do you make of the fact that Trump's campaign had to sue Bucks County in order to kind of make sure enfranchisement was implemented here, that there have been long lines, people were being turned away? What did you make of all of that?
It's immoral. It's not even necessary to take a long time to process a ballot. It is deliberate, it is intentional, and it is absolutely immoral. And it was taking probably about 6-7 minutes per person once they've handed in their request. They don't need to take that long. This is deliberate, and they know it, and we know it too. And they created a lot of press, a lot of free press for us. And when the extension happened, I actually came here because I've been traveling the state, and I said, this is a very opportune moment to get more people out to the polls, because it's all going to be about the early numbers. Really, if we get a high enough number of early voters, then it's going to be a lot harder for Philadelphia to be watching the returns and to make the difference like they did last time. And they sit and they wait. It's always Philadelphia who's the last county to count. And we're watching them like hawks this time, and hopefully our numbers will be so good that they are not able to pull off what they did last time.
When you say what they pulled off last time, you felt their vote was stolen?
I sure do.
If it is it's declared a Harris victory, what do you think will be the response? I mean, the narrative sometimes on the Democrat side is, well, whatever happens, they're going to dispute it. Like, it doesn't matter. They're just going to say it just as a tactic.
I think that the country is so divided right now, whomever wins, there will be an uproar in some regard. We've been through messy times before, and I think that this will be no different, but I do think that we are less than a week away from very interesting history.
I have to jump in and clarify for listeners that I did fact check one of his comments there, his comment about the Democrat convention giving out free abortions. A Planned Parenthood branch happened to be providing free medication abortions in Chicago that ran at the same time, but was wrongly connected to the DNC. So that was fake news there that you heard from him.
Great to clear that up. Poppy, thank you so much. Great to hear your reporting there for Monocle in Pennsylvania. Her editor was Charlie Bell, and we'll hear more from Poppy and Charlie in these crucial last days. This is the Monocle Daily. You're back with the Monocle Daily here in Atlanta, Georgia. Last night, the Des Moines Register paper of record for the Midwest state of Iowa released its hotly awaited poll before Election Day. And it showed that Vice President Kamala Harris has nudged into the lead in that state. It's a tight lead, I should say, but this newspaper has form in calling it correctly. Iowa voted red in the last two elections. Could all that be about to change? Well, Zach Wahls is a state senator for Iowa and also executive director for the Next 50, a PAC that supports the campaigns of 50 Democratic candidates. That's governors, senators running for Congress in this election as well. It's exciting news for the Democrats out of Iowa, Zach. Brings Iowa potentially back into play as a swing state. But quite extraordinary, isn't it, that given that the vice president hasn't been in Iowa since the primaries?
Well, the Trump campaign hasn't had much of a presence here either. And I think what you're seeing is that there's been a very significant shift since Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden as the nominee over the summer. This same pollster saw Donald Trump with a nearly 20-point lead before President Biden stepped aside. And so there was a poll about 8 weeks ago that showed that Kamala Harris was only down 4 points in the state. I think some folks wrote that off as potentially an outlier or something that they weren't taking seriously. And so when people say that they're surprised at the result that was published last night showing Kamala Harris up by 3 points, that is actually very much in line with what you have seen in terms of the trend line since over the summer. It's also very consistent with a bunch of polls that we've seen across the Midwest in states like Kansas and Ohio, where there may not be a huge presence from either presidential campaign, but where you've seen real softening of President Trump's support.
And if this poll rings true, what has been happening in Iowa to shift the numbers this way? This is a state that voted Donald Trump in the last two elections. Why might they be changing tack now?
Well, and have to keep in mind that it also supported President Obama in the two elections before that. And Iowa, for a very long time, has had a status as a battleground state. As late as 2018, we elected 3 out of our 4 U.S. House seats were held by Democrats. And so even though there's obviously been a rightward shift in the last few years, this is not out of the normal for what Iowa has been historically. I would say that there are probably 2 key factors that are driving what's happening. The first is that when Donald Trump's Supreme Court justices overturned Roe versus Wade, Iowa Republicans here at the state level passed one of the nation's most extreme abortion bans, a 6-week abortion ban that prevents women from accessing abortion before most women even know that they're pregnant. And that has had, like in many other states, a very strong negative effect with a lot of voters, and not just women, by the way, but a lot of voters all over Iowa. But if you look at the poll from last night, you'll see that in particular, independent women are breaking heavily towards Vice President Harris, as are women over the age of 65. These are women who remember what life was like before Roe versus Wade became the law of the land. And I think what they've seen now is this massive backlash towards the very radical policies that Iowa Republicans have introduced at the state level, but that were made possible by Donald Trump at the national level. And then the second thing that has happened in Iowa is that Republicans here at the state level have pushed one of the nation's most extreme private school voucher programs, essentially using public taxpayer funds to pay for vouchers for private schools that aren't required to support or educate every Iowa kid like our public schools are. That is also very unpopular. And so you're seeing federal candidates as well as state candidates talking about these really radical changes that Iowa Republicans have made at the state level. And it doesn't surprise me that that's kind of rippling up the ticket as well.
Zach, you're a state senator in Iowa, but you also run a PAC called the Next 50, which supports the next generation of 50 Democratic candidates in every race, from senators to governors, congresspeople all over this country, including deep red states like Alabama. Now, there was a lot of talk going into this election about split ticket voting, people backing, for instance, the former president, but choosing Democrats for their state representatives and potentially vice versa. I mean, now your candidates have been out, month after month knocking on doors. Are you hearing from them those kind of sentiments coming from voters when they've been out campaigning?
Well, I heard it just yesterday when I was knocking doors in suburban Des Moines. A lot of people who are just really sick of all the drama. I mean, you saw on SNL last night, obviously, Vice President Harris made a surprise appearance, and they talked about ending the drama law. And I think a lot of people feel that way, not just in Iowa, but all over the country. For the last 10 years, our politics have gotten more and more divisive, more angry, more bitter, pitting people against each other. And the through line for the last 10 years has been Donald Trump coming down that escalator in Manhattan and launching one of the most divisive campaigns, that our country has seen in modern times. And so I think that there are a lot of people who are ready to turn the page. They may not love every single policy that Vice President Harris stands for, or agree with her on every issue, but when they compare the tumult, the drama, the chaos that both defined the campaign for Donald Trump, but also his 4 years as president, and obviously the insurrection on January 6th, that was a very haunting kind of punctuation note on that. I think that there are a lot of folks who are just ready to turn the page and move on to a new chapter of American history.
Regardless of who ends up in the White House, a very important race to be watching, which can sometimes get lost in this final moment for a lot of people watching this, is, of course, the Senate. Senator Joe Manchin is retiring this year. He's obviously a long-standing but somewhat controversial Democrat. There's a pretty good chance that his seat there in West Virginia may well go to Republican, which means Democrats are going to need to hold on to the rest of their seats to keep the Senate. Now, the next 50 Your PAC is back in Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan. That's a pretty crucial seat here, isn't it? It's the first time it's up for grabs since, I think, the mid-90s.
Yeah, the next 50 has been very excited to support candidates up and down the ticket. We support candidates running at every level of government, from the local and municipal levels all the way up to the U.S. Senate. We're supporting 2 U.S. Senate candidates this cycle, Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, as well as Ruben Gallego in Arizona. Alyssa Slotkin she's a very prominent congresswoman who flipped a previously Republican-held seat when she was running for the first time in 2018 for the U.S. House of Representatives. And we were really excited when she announced that she was planning to run for the U.S. Senate. Holding that seat is absolutely critical for Democrats and trying to make sure that we have a chance at preserving a majority in the Senate. Ruben Gallego in Arizona, obviously running to fill the seat that's being vacated by now independent Kyrsten Sinema, who, not unlike Joe Manchin, rankled a lot of Democrats during her tenure. But there are other key races as well that I'm watching very closely, including John Tester in Montana and Sherrod Brown in Ohio. And another one that is on people's radar that is maybe kind of getting more attention in the last few weeks is Dan Osborne, who's an independent who's running in Nebraska against a Republican Senator, Deb Fischer. If Dan Osborne is able to flip that,
do you wish the party had done more to help Dan? Sorry to jump in, Zach, but do you wish the party had done more to help Dan along the way?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, look, Dan is an independent. He's running as an independent. I was out knocking doors for a candidate who the Next 50 has endorsed in Omaha, Tony Vargas. And the reality is that they are not working together, right? He is running an independent campaign. And I don't think that I don't think that Dan's ability to campaign authentically would be real if he was just a Democrat running in independent's clothing. He truly is an independent-minded senator. And I think that if he is elected, he certainly will have a voting record that reflects that. And so he said that he wouldn't caucus with either party, Democrat or Republican. And so I think that would be a very different kind of independent than what you've seen with like a Bernie Sanders or Angus King, both of whom do caucus with the Democrats. And so I think that there's going to be obviously some very new dynamics if he does win. But there's another U.S. Senate race that's happening in Nebraska. There's actually 2. One of them was because of a special election essentially that happened when that seat was vacated earlier by Ben Sass. And you have a kind of a generic Democrat running against a generic Republican on the other seat, and there's a 30-point gap compared to a neck and neck race with Dan Osborne. And so I think a lot of folks are watching that race very closely. And win or lose, I think it's going to have to force a very big conversation within the Democratic Party about our willingness to work with independents in situations like this one.
And Zach, just finally, you're often dealing with first-time candidates, people that are running for office for the very first time. How could the U.S. system be made better to help get more talent into politics outside of the traditional, fields and that we are used to getting people into politics?
Yeah, so the Next 50 was founded in 2019 to push back against the 50-year plan that the right-wing conservative movement has had in this country to identify and support, their young leaders and throughout their careers. And, some of your listeners may be familiar with a lot of these alumni, people like Mitch McConnell, Mike Pence, Grover Norquist. Now there's this whole new generation of people like Charlie Kirk and his organization Turning Point USA. And we, as on the left, on the center left, have not done a very good job of doing a similar approach of identifying and investing and supporting these young leaders. And the reality is that, unless there are organizations like the Next 50 that are dedicated to doing that work, it's not something that happens organically or on its own. And that's something that the conservative movement learned a long time ago, which is why they've started these large national nonprofit organizations that have done exactly that. And so I think it all comes down to making a decision, a conscious decision as a party, as donors, as people who care about the future of our country, to invest in and support these young leaders. That's the mission of our organization. And anyone who wants to learn more can visit our website at the Next 50. It's the Next and then the number 50.us.
Zach Wahls there, State Senator in Iowa and Executive Director, as we heard, of the Next 50. Thank you for joining us on the Monocle Daily.
Now, next we cross over to Pennsylvania, where Republican Donald Trump has been holding a rally in a final push to shore up support. Monocle Radio's senior news editor, Chris Cermak, is there for us. Good afternoon, Chris. What's the mood like where you are?
The mood here is really quite striking in terms of just, I think, how battle-hardened everyone is, how passionate both sides are at this point in the race. Obviously, we only have 2 days to go. Most of the people I spoke to actually here, some of them have already voted. Pretty much everybody has made up their mind about which way they're going to go in this race. So this was really a chance for Donald Trump to get out the base, to fire up the base. But let's have a listen to some of the voters I spoke to on the way in.
I think he's going to win, but I think there's going to, just like 2020, I think there's going to be some BS that happens at 4 o'clock in the morning at some voting machines where suddenly she gets an extra 200,000 or whatever, and just like Joey got back in 2020 there. And
is there something that would kind of restore your faith that we just have normal votes in this country?
if we went back to paper ballots, this mail-in crap is complete crap. It started in 2020 with all of the COVID crap, and it has been just a way to cheat. That's all it is.
We know how we're going to vote, but we want to just hear him for sure to solidify everything. You hear the stuff in the news and you're like, does he really say stuff like that? And you just want to be able to say to people, no, we went to a rally. He didn't say anything crazy. You know what I mean? He said good things, and that's what we want to support. I just wanted to see him in person and hear what he actually says versus what the media allows us to see or hear. Does that make sense?
Would anything change your mind?
I don't think so, because again, it's more party versus person.
Flew from England all the way here for Trump. I was supposed to come in 2020, but I made it here this time because of COVID restrictions last time.
What made you make a journey like that? What is it about Trump that convinced you to do this?
Just the hope that if America can do something, can change something, then maybe England can, the rest of the world can also follow suit with that. I want him to change the economy. I want him to change the way the world views America. I want him to change the immigration. I want him to change almost everything that comes in with big politics, big corporations, all of it. I want the whole change.
Now, what's interesting, I think, particularly when you hear those first two clips, Chris, is kind of, Donald Trump in this rally, he really did go off script, it has to be said. He focused, he said that he was not particularly reading from the teleprompter or what his advisors may have wanted him to say. And he really leaned into this idea that this vote is going to be rigged, that there should not be any mail-in ballots, what you heard from the first person. And to the point of the second voter you heard there, I mean, I was sadly unable to reach her afterwards to see if there was anything she heard that might have been crazy, but it's fair to say he really went for his base on this one. He spent a lot of time talking about the possibility of cheating in this election. He spent a lot of time talking about the media and pointing at us, drawing boos to our little booths over there. So this really was, at the end, a pretty strong speech, a fiery speech from Donald Trump, really aimed at his base and certainly not aimed at the middle.
Chris, great to have you on the ground there. Monocle's Chris Cermak reporting in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Now, we've been in Atlanta all this week, one of the fastest growing cities in America and also home to the world's busiest airport, the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, serving over 100 million passengers per year.
WSP is a global consulting firm that works to implement sustainable solutions in the built environment. They've been tasked with the upgrade of one of the concourses of this global hub.
And I'm very happy to say that we're now joined by Todd McClendon, who's the Senior Vice President of Aviation Engineering at WSP, and by Edmund Ramos, the Deputy Program Director for this project at WSP. Welcome both to the Monocle Daily. Great to have you here with us. Edmund, can I begin with you? Could you give us a brief overview of the Concourse D widening project? What sparked the need for this?
Sure. So Concourse D is one of the original concourses that make up what we call the CPTC over at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. It's about 44 years old this year. It was opened in 1980. And as I've said earlier, it's the narrowest of all the concourses that we've got. And for the time that it's been opened, it's been serving regional jet operations primarily for the airlines that we have operating at Hartsfield-Jackson. So because the airline industry is now transitioning out of the regional jets, going to these bigger planes that would allow us to be more efficient in operations, we need to redevelop Concourse D. Put shortly, we have we have essentially outgrown the operations that's needed for the future, has outgrown the existing infrastructure that we have, and therefore we've been tasked to widen the concourse, but you're doing it at the world's busiest airport, and we cannot shut the gates down doing that. And so the mandate is go ahead, widen Concourse D, but you got to keep the concourse operational at the same time.
That's right. You're almost building the plane while flying it, I guess, aren't you? And Todd, just talk us through some of those challenges, because, Atlanta, it is such a major hub here. So many people passing through. Is it, how urgent was this upgrade, if you like?
Well, the airlines are buying bigger aircraft, more efficient aircraft, but more people. So probably a little behind the curve in getting going. But they were anxious for us to hurry. As Edmund said, we can only close 8 gates, and we needed to get it done in 5 years. So, trying to keep the airport open, keep people passing through where we're working. I think we got the biggest compliment recently. A reporter came out, and he asked us, we were in the concourse, he said, "Where's the construction site?" And so for us, that was quite a win, because it was right behind a little wall behind us, and pointed that out. So job well done. That I do get to stand here and represent a lot of people that are out there working, but I think that was the biggest compliment, that we were able to work behind the scenes, keep people flowing. We don't want you to miss your flight, keep all the technology in place, and at the same time as we take walls down and do things, cut wires, so to speak, we don't want to influence any of your technology. We want your cell phone to work, your Wi-Fi, try to have concessions, not miss your flight, obviously, and try to be as pleasant of an experience as possible.
Well, and tell us about some of the innovative design and techniques that have been used here, because to address some of these challenges, you've been working with modular construction. How does that operate, and what are some of the specific challenges, Edmund?
Sure. So we set out to really evaluate what is the optimal way to accomplish the goal that was defined to us by the airport and its partners, the airlines, right? So we work with our construction managers at risk, our design team, and we asked them, what are these innovative ways that have been out there in the market that people use to solve this problem. And so the concept of a modular construction was put forward. And to put it in a very simple description, when you do modular construction, you essentially reimagine how you build a building. Traditionally, when you do traditional construction, what you'll do is you're going to start with your foundation, civil work, etc., right? And right after that, your steel will start showing up and you erect the building. But just like what Todd said, hurry. We needed the space, we needed the gate, and so we looked for ways to actually run 2 construction sites. One over the concourse, working on your foundation, your civil work, and at the same time, a mile away from Concourse D, we have this yard where we actually build the building that's going to widen the concourse. So it was such a game changer when it came to being able to keep the existing concourse operational, at the same time build the building ahead of that. So when the concourse was ready and the building has gotten farther along, overnight, it was in April when we started moving the first set of modules. We moved these 710-ton buildings, massive, right, using what's called self-propelled modular transporters. Transported them across 2 runways, across multiple taxiways, and gently and very accurately set those building modules right next to
slide them into place.
You make it sound like it was so easy.
Sort of was.
It sort of was.
We were, of course, the unknown,
Of course.
But, they had to get it within 3/16 of an inch. I can't convert that to the metric system for you guys, but
that's fine. We're in Atlanta. It's fine. It's good.
It's very small, right? And they just drove that thing in. I've watched people try to park a car in a parking spot, and here's a building that's 192 feet long, 30 feet wide, and they drove this thing in, and I mean, literally almost one pass, and it was where it needed to be. And I guess they got across, Edmund, in 45 minutes?
Yeah, about 45 minutes.
We expected it to be longer. We expected, we had planned for a whole bunch of impacts, things, batteries stopped working, things of that nature. And, knock on wood, it all worked out.
It all slid into place.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
A global hub airport, which Atlanta is, Dallas is as well, a place that in many ways is the first entry point, first time they set foot in a piece of American infrastructure. It means it's really important to get it right. I look around the US at the moment. Portland has just opened a brand new airport space out there, made of wood, quite impressive. LAX, famously slightly creaking under the weight of the number of people who are coming through there at the minute. Just give us a sense, the next few years in American airport design, what are we going to see? What sort of things are exciting you in that world of what airports are going to look like in the future, Edmund?
Sure. A lot of the existing airports here in the U.S. Are aging infrastructure. So what we've been able to show here, Atlanta being a global leader, not only in being a really good and efficient airport, but also always willing to take on these big challenges. Still remember talks about how they went ahead and found ways to innovatively work on the fifth runway, and then back then in the old program. This is just another good example where, the city and the airport has just been very instrumental in, being a harbinger of innovation in the industry. And you've got a lot of these aging airports around the U.S. And I think what we've been able to show here is something that we're so excited about that we can replicate elsewhere. And it truly is a valuable solution going forward for airports.
Exciting. I expect to be coming through your new concourse very soon. Edmund Ramos and Todd McClendon from WSP. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, South Carolina has implemented one of the most restrictive book ban regulations in the United States, enabling mass censorship in school classrooms and libraries across the state. Monocle Radio's On Books editor, Georgina Godwin, is in South Carolina right now, where she's been attending the Charleston Literary Festival. Georgina, great to have you with us. This is a topic that has, without a doubt, been at the heart of discussions at the festival. Tell us about some of the conversations you've had and why you're here.
So I'm in South Carolina, as you say, for the Charleston Literary Festival, which is this extraordinary kind of cultural takeover of this historic city. It's been absolutely brilliant. And so many fine minds gathered here. One topic of conversation that seems to have come up again and again is people not so much worried about the election results, although they are. They tell me they wake up with panic attacks in the middle of the night. But what people are really worried about is the Supreme Court. A lot of very liberal people attending the festival, many of them in gay relationships, and they're fearing that there will be erosions of their rights. On a state level, of course, they can still stay married to their same-sex partners, but on a federal level, that might change, and people are very, very worried about that. There are genuine plans for people to move out. Of course, we've also been talking about books, a huge amount about books. The reason they brought me over was to speak to Claire Massoud, who is a wonderful American writer of Algerian descent. So essentially, like me, she's a white African. And I think that's why they wanted me in particular. But they also wanted me because it turns out that Meet the Writers is a huge program in Charleston. And I have this fan base, and people kept stopping me for selfies. It was quite extraordinary. Anyway, we had this fantastic conversation, and she was talking about history, about the lessons that we must learn from history, about inherited trauma, and how all of that stuff that happened to people around the First and Second World Wars, really, you feel it's epigenetic. You feel it throughout. It resounds through the generations, and how we must learn to cope with today by looking back. And we've also been talking a lot about how literature is an empathy generator. How if you really want to understand how other people live and how circumstances change and how lives work, you've got to read. It's the only way to kind of get yourself into a different person's mindset. And I think that's why the talk of banning books, I mean, that's never gone well anywhere, but that's why that talk of banning books is so alarming.
Georgina, when you look at the list of books that are under consideration for being banned, I mean, it's quite extraordinary. We're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a Southern classic. You have 1984, Romeo and Juliet. I mean, these are kind of literary staples in a way. I mean, what, those looking to ban these books, what are they hoping to achieve? Have you got a sense of that?
I mean, it is really, really quite extraordinary. I mean, I think that those were some of the books on the proposed list. I think actually they have decided to keep the Shakespeare and to keep To Kill a Mockingbird. But it's about them wanting to. This is what they say, to preserve the purity of the youth. Youth is going to be sexting and finding porn on their phones anyway. I mean, it's really not going to make much of a difference. But I was really trying to find out what was behind this. So I caught up with Professor James Shapiro. Now he's a Shakespeare expert. He's written about the last time the United States had a huge crackdown on culture, which was back in the 1930s. He's also a member of the Authors Guild, very influential body that sort of looks at literature and the laws governing that. So I asked him what the Authors Guild, what his organization's doing to try and stop this eradication of culture.
The Authors Guild is involved in all kinds of educational and litigational practices. We are fighting against efforts across the land, not just in South Carolina, but in almost every state, to ban books, to ban access to reading material. You have to understand that the average American reads a novel a year. That is, somebody who's an adult. That's one novel a year. We're not a reading culture. And one of the reasons why disinformation and the inability to sift through a lot of stories that are being peddled in political climate, that inability stemmed from the fact that we're not the kind of readers that previous generations were. I think of President Abraham Lincoln in the White House, who had much of Shakespeare by heart, and as he struggled with the challenges of healing a nation, he turned again and again to Shakespeare. I think he'd be turning in his grave if he knew anybody was considering banning a Shakespeare play and denying access to it to young people. History does not treat those who ban books well. I was in Germany at the American Academy in Berlin last spring and traveled in Berlin and Heidelberg. And there are memorials in those places to where the Nazis burned and banned books. I don't know where those memorials will be in South Carolina, but there will be such memorials if book banning takes hold here.
Professor James Shapiro there, talking to Monocle's Georgina Godwin in Charleston for us. Thank you for joining the Monocle Daily.
Now, finally today, we turn our focus back to the city of Atlanta, which has been our host for the past week. A city ripe with history, and that, of course, includes as well the built environment.
Enter Gamble and Gamble, an architecture studio run by the duo Michael and Lee Ann Gamble, who are joining us right here on the Monocle Radio desk. They've done tremendous work on historic preservation and adaptive reuse around the world. Welcome to both of you.
Oh, we're here, and listen, the world is not as dark as it's being portrayed here. We don't support book banning. We do support air travel. But the political climate, we're all going to survive, everyone. Just hang on. And you'll detect a Southern accent. We're both from the South. We want to say thank you to Monocle Radio. What a pleasure to be here. We want to redirect the discussion back to design.
Absolutely, and that is exactly what we're going to do. But this city is so important in American history, especially around the civil rights movement. How does this city deal with its built history, those built legacies?
Well, I mean, the built legacy is something that has been under attack for a while. And Leanne and I are preservationists. We look at the built environment as something that needs to be preserved. It needs to be adapted, right? And we don't see. Well, on the one hand, yes, we have quite a history. On the other hand, we have to project everything into the future. We're futurist.
And let's turn to some of the work that you've done. When we spoke earlier, we were talking about, how from this very location within a 3 to 4 mile radius, there are some of these historic landmarks, and including some of the work you've done at the Hotel Clermont, also the Daily World Building.
Right.
And this conversation about, historic preservation and adaptive reuse is really interesting because it has to be done right. It is a part of history at the end of the day. So tell us more about some of that work.
Well, I think Leanne and I both want to definitely preserve and adapt. So, yeah, historic buildings need to be recognized. And it's one of the reasons we're in London. How we met you through Maylin. But the past has to be preserved, but it also has to be projected into the future.
Now, these buildings can't be just frozen in time. We have to keep them relevant to keep the city vibrant.
Exactly.
And that's where I think London is a great example of that. You can see centuries of history there. But the history is, it's not just stopping at that point in time. You have to think about the future and how these buildings can, rather than just be museums, they need to be places where people live and work and shop and make the city vibrant.
Yeah, I want to add, I think in our 35-year history, in the design and development business, Leanne's a design and developer, I'm an academic designer, we've never torn down anything. Why tear it down? The most sustainable buildings in the world are the ones that are already built.
And I'm curious about, the lessons that you take from both sides of the Atlantic, because of course, very different urban landscapes, very different built heritage, but there's always a learning that goes both ways. So I wonder what you have been able to implement on this side of the pond and on the other, based on, your respective backgrounds. How does that play into your work?
Listen, I think Leanne is the sort of foundation of the discussion because she's into genealogy. And the question is, do we make buildings or do they make us? That's a big question, right? We make buildings, they make us. We can't erase our past, and we all have lots of cultural baggage. We all know that, and you can hear my Georgia accent here. But yeah, we have to recognize everything that goes along with, let's say, Britain's colonialization of the world and Atlanta's desegregation. That's part of the story. So the question came up earlier with Carlotta relative to regeneration. We're not regenerist because regenerist, it's like a lizard regrowing its tail. We want to be true to history. And you cannot regenerate history. You have to tell the story.
Even the tricky bits, even the bits that...
Exactly. You can't erase it. And I think that's been one of the things that's happened in Atlanta over the past 40 years, I would say. The more immediate reaction was just, it's something we're embarrassed about, we feel remorse for, and want to just tear it down. But I think it's more important to keep it there for a reminder to everyone.
Yeah.
But to say this is not how we're going to live now, we're going to still utilize these same spaces and learn from them.
I've done quite a bit of work in Dallas, Texas, for example, a city that in its urban landscape has a lot of these tricky bits of history that it doesn't know how to deal with. It's also ringed by highways that cut through a lot of communities, especially African-American communities, that were just built without their even consideration, let alone their consent. When you look at places like that, do you see the right thinking coming into city halls around America along this front? What I mean is, are they having the right discussions, or is that what we just talked about, that idea that the tricky history, you just kind of pull it down? Is that the dominant view, or is that changing?
I have an answer to that. It's a very heated discussion, as it should be. It's very politically charged, and there are a lot of differential opinions. But we have to have the discourse. So if we just tear the building down, or if we just erase the history, there's no discourse left.
And Leanne, I wonder on that point, why is a building a great starting point to have a difficult discussion? As in, if you have a building that in its legacy is so fraught, why is that useful to have a physical embodiment of it in the form of a building, when some might say, let's just year zero and start again?
I think it makes it a lot more real to the people that you're trying to tell the story to.
Sure.
To be able to go to a place, stand there and look, I think you get more of a sense of this is what happened here, and more of an appreciation of it.
Yeah, I'm just really curious. Here in Atlanta, obviously you guys have done some great projects here, but can you point to a few really interesting historical spaces that exist here that do tell a story about this tricky history that we're talking about?
I have several.
Do share, Michael, please.
The Capitol, okay? The Capitol hasn't been torn down, right? Several government buildings haven't been torn down. And we've participated in the adaptive reuse of a number of buildings that haven't been removed that tell interesting stories. And they're still economically successful. They're not home runs, but that's what they do. What do you think? Leanne, what do you think?
The Fox Theater was coming to my mind.
Oh, the Fox Theater, God.
And there's another theater where Gone with the Wind, as most people listening probably know, was written here in Atlanta, just a few blocks from here. And the premiere of the movie was here.
Yeah.
It was in a theater that's now torn down. But the Fox Theater is similar in that there was a colored entrance and a main entrance. And I believe that Butterfly McQueen was one of the actresses, she was not even allowed to go into the theater for the opening. And the Fox Theater comes to my mind for that reason.
And that's such an interesting case. Because I know that has been restored, hasn't it? It is there. How did they deal with that?
So there no longer is a colored entrance.
Sure.
Sure.
It's
but to the same
fire
point,
exit.
I want to add a point that at Georgia Tech, I'm still loyal to. It's been difficult. I'm a professor at Georgia Tech. In the architecture building, there were no women's bathrooms until the 70s.
Wow.
We didn't tear it down. We adapted. It's a beautiful story. I mean, we have something to refer to as opposed to something that we've forgotten.
Now, we've been talking a lot about, adaptation with history in mind, but briefly, because I wanted to ask you about this before we let you go, about the work you've also done in adaptation when it comes to climate and sustainability through your work as well with coastal communities. How does that play into your work?
It's everyone wants to use the word regeneration or green construction, and they've both been commodified, and they're fetishized. Adaptation is where it's at. We're humans. We're going to adapt, right? We're going to find our way. So let's find joy in it. My teaching is based on play. So sustainability and adaptation shouldn't be painful. We should enjoy it. We have to find our way, and we have to find joy in it. We know that there are numbers of cultural, political, socioeconomic issues that we have to address, but let's work together and be happy. I mean, I got to tell you, I was a little turned off when I walked up and I heard all the political discourse. Come on, let's get over that, everybody. Let's not politicize joy, and let's not politicize history. Let's find a way to get on down the road, and that's a Georgia thing.
Michael and Leanne Gamble of Gamble & Gamble Architecture Practice, thank you for joining us.
And this has been a Georgia thing. This is our final day recording here in Atlanta, Georgia. So thank you to this city for hosting us over the last 4 days. It's been amazing. I should say this has been a bumper edition of the Monocle Daily.
It has been a bumper edition.
And it's a big thank you to all our guests. Today's show was produced by Carlotta Ribello. Our sound engineers were Sam Impey here in Atlanta and Mariella Bellevin back in London.
The Monocle Daily is back at the same time tomorrow, this time from Washington, D.C., as we continue to broadcast from the United States in the lead up to Election Day. You can follow our coverage by subscribing to the podcast. I'm Carlotta Ribello.
And I'm Christopher Lord. Goodbye and thanks for listening.